I was quite young when I started doing that. I would have been like 5 or 6, and I just loved like running out into like the middle of the backyard and waiting for the storm to come. So I'd end up, being pulled back inside, and I was allowed to sit at the window and watch for the storm to come, and look for the lightning and look for all these things. And when you're in that place of safety, the storm doesn't really concern you too much. Like I was brought back inside, and my mom, she was there, my family was there, and I would sit at the window, and you could, the wind would pick up, and it would be, slapping the window with rain, and you could see the trees, and really being pushed around, and you sort of think like, if you're in the middle of it, it probably wouldn't be very fun, but watching it, I thought it was quite beautiful, and I enjoyed it a lot. And at the end of the storm, sometimes if it was a relatively quick storm, because sometimes they don't last very long. Maybe they only last 20 minutes, half an hour, or something like that. You get like a rainbow that would come out. And I always thought that was really fascinating how, the light would, basically break through the storm. And it really is just those rays of light passing through the water that had just been previously falling, which was causing a rainbow. This is a natural thing. But I loved watching that, and I loved it was always something I looked forward to. Fall is always my favorite time of year. And I love that natural thing that would happen. But, there's likening, these storms, that may be, obviously in the natural, we consider how these storms come upon our lives. And as I was mentioning, how it is that how we feel when we're in the middle of those storms. When I was thinking how storms, they don't necessarily come quickly. Like I say, you can, some of them kind of catch you off guard a little bit. The storm clouds, build quite quickly. But most of the time you can, especially during this time of year, in the fall, you can get an idea of when a storm is coming. Like for me anyway, I always sort of found there was like, a bit of a smell, and things just seem to be, there's that saying, where's the calm before the storm? And, that was a phrase that sailors used because they always felt that there was like this weather phenomenon when, a storm was about to come, like even the waves would be a bit more still and the wind would be calmer. And then the next thing they knew, there would be this storm. So the sailors themselves sort of had an indication of when the storm was coming. And, I want to liken these thoughts as to how we've been called to go out into the seas, to go out into the world, and be in a position where sometimes we have to be within that storm. Not to run away from the storm, not to hide from it, not to, if so be it, be in a position of safety, but to remember, storms are a part of life. Storms are a part of our salvation. They're a part of our lives and our fellowship. Let's take it up in Genesis chapter 2. Just a bit of a reflection here of when the Lord was first creating the world. And just a few natural elements to look at here, just to kind of introduce things a little bit. In Genesis chapter 2, if we take it up in verse 5, and this is part of the process of the Lord creating things in the earth. Every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground. But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. So what I want to picture here is at this time, we didn't have the natural occurrence of rain like we do here, particularly in Vancouver. We're coming up into that season now, fall and winter, where we're going to be dealing with a lot of rain. We're going to be dealing with storms naturally. But there was a time here where upon the earth it didn't rain. So in other words, there weren't any clouds in the air. There weren't storms as such. There wasn't like a rainy period like where we have here. Obviously we have rain. The rain falls, it causes everything to grow and be nice and green in the summer. We don't like it in the winter, but it does cause for a nice summer and spring. But obviously that's the purpose of nature. It rains upon the earth to allow things to grow, trees, plants, herbs, etc. And there's a nature to that. But at this time, that wasn't occurring. There was this mist that would come up from the ground. And what I wanted to liken there was that at this time in the garden, there were no storms, there were no clouds, there was no darkening, there was no picking up of the wind. It was a very calm and tranquil situation. It was a very peaceful place. And obviously we're referring to the Garden of Eden. We're referring to where, Adam and Eve lived. And this was before the situation of sin came upon them. So when they were in that situation, when they were walking upon the earth at this time, they didn't have even naturally storms. Those storms didn't come until sin entered in. If we go down over to chapter 9. Go over to chapter 9, but just to continue to explain that a little bit, when you think about it, when there was no clouds, there was no dark storms or anything like that, it would always make, there's that chorus where, there's that line in the chorus, "Are clouds obscuring the sun from view?" Where, the likening of that is that even though there be clouds, even though there be dark storms, even though there be things that might be getting in our way, either naturally or spiritually, it doesn't mean that the Lord isn't there. So we know that obviously the sun continues to shine above the clouds, and even though they may be obscuring our view, the sun will shine through. As I say, even in the natural, the natural condition of the storm, the sun breaks through and the rainbow comes, and that's that beauty that comes from the storm afterwards. So even though the storm itself might not necessarily have been something fun, something beautiful comes out of it. In Genesis chapter 9, where are we here? Genesis chapter 9 and verse 12. "And God said, 'This is the token which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations.'" So this is referring to the rainbow, as we just mentioned, that comes out after the storm. So this was the period after Noah and the flood, and the time that they were in the flood. So there was this time that went on. If you look at Noah's time, there was this time that went on before the storm. So there was a time where Noah was building the ark. He was warning people to come. He was telling people what they needed to know. People were mocking them because they thought, well, it hasn't rained here. How can this be? You're very foolish and all these things. But he was trying to warn them of something that was going to come. He knew that the storm was going to come. He knew that the storm was going to be upon the world, or that area of the world at the time, and he was trying to warn the people of what to expect. This is what the Lord is saying. So they didn't listen, obviously, and then the time went on, and Noah did what he was called to do with the animals and his family, and they were in the ark, and they were in the ark for 40 days, and the time of that flood ended. The time of that storm and this punishment came upon the earth. That was over. And after it came this rainbow. Came this rainbow that the Lord used as a way to represent his covenant, to represent that he would not allow such punishment to come upon the earth again, or upon mankind. So the rainbow becomes this assurance that as we look upon it, and we can often think that when we look upon the rainbow that comes out after a storm, well, that's just the assurance of knowing that the Lord is there, that the sun is breaking through, that maybe that period of time where there's this hardship, the Lord is showing that he's still available, he's still there. Read here in verse 12. And God said, "This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between you and all flesh, and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be a cloud, and I will look upon it, and I remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature and all flesh that is upon the earth." So this is a promise, an assurance that the Lord has established, not only to those who were alive at that time, but it's really a covenant and an assurance and a promise that he's given to us. That, that he's always going to be there. He's always going to be, amongst the storm. He's going to be above the storm. He's going to continue to shine. He's going to continue to be there. So even if we're going through these storms in life, the Lord will be there in the end. That's his promise. He will be there all the way through, and he will be there at the end. That's his promise. That's his assurance. That's what we have and we can look forward to as brothers and sisters in the Lord. Let's see here. Let's go to Mark chapter 4. Can't really talk about storms without talking about one of the greatest stories of a storm in the Bible and the gospel. Now, we all know it very well. I'm not necessarily going to go through this whole story. We know the story of the storm, the disciples who were on the boat, the ones who were on the boat with the Lord, and the storm came. And I started really considering, different aspects of this story. I mean, I've looked at the story many times. I've brought the story up in the Word many times. Many of us have looked to the analogy of the story and the storm. But I looked at the storm slightly differently in regards to these thoughts. And, there's often things we look at, how Jesus was in the hinder part of the ship. He was in the back of the ship. He wasn't really necessarily in the midst of what was going on when the storm was coming upon them. The disciples themselves were in the middle of the storm. They were the ones that, were getting upset and that were feeling the distress of the situation. But I was thinking about how, it doesn't necessarily say, it just says the disciples were on the boat with them. But many of the disciples were fishermen. And many of the disciples would have, at one time, been out on a boat, and a storm would have come upon them. And I speak of this naturally. They would have been out on a boat at some point in time, and a storm would have come upon them. So you sort of think, like, would they not have known what to do? Would they not have been in this situation before? Would they have not have, looked upon the situation and thought, I know what to do. I've been here before. We've been in storms before. Now, I'm not trying to knock them. There's a point that I want to bring about here, about this particular storm. But I imagine that at least, I don't know if how many disciples were on the boat with them. It did say how there was many ships out in the water. So how many disciples were on this particular ship with the Lord? I'm not sure. How many of those disciples were seasoned fishermen? I'm not sure. But, I started thinking about how many of us, Brother Thornley, he talked about how he's been walking with the Lord for 30 years. He's a seasoned fisherman. But I imagine there's probably been a few times, and I'm not knocking him, I've done it too, you've all done it, where maybe we've gone and ran to the Lord and said, Lord, don't you care that we perish? Have we done that? How many times have we done that? Let's be honest with ourselves. But most of us here are seasoned fishermen. We're ones that have been out in the storm before. We've seen these storms before. We've seen these storms come. And sometimes that storm, just becomes so harsh and maybe just a bit too much for us for whatever reason. Or we don't look to the Lord, as quickly as we should. Or we start running around saying, woe is me, and oh, this upsets me, and I can't believe this is happening. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Lord, carest not that we perish. What did the Lord do? He got up and he rebuked the wind. He rebuked the seas. Now, that's something I want to look at a bit more in detail, but he turned to his disciples after he did this, and he said, he looked at them, as if to say, what were you thinking? You have the same power and authority that I do. Where is your faith? Where is your confidence in me? Why did you not take hold of the power that you have? Now, we're likening it to men and possibly women that, weren't spirit-filled. But let's liken this in a spiritual sense, where if the Lord was to turn to us, when we're in the middle of a storm, when we're upset, and we're turning to him and saying to him, carest not that we perish, and he turns to us and says, where is your faith? Where is your confidence? Why all of a sudden have you stopped believing in me? Because you have just as much power to stand against the storm as I do. That's essentially what he was saying to the disciples there. And as I said, some of them quite possibly seasoned fishermen, just as we would be. And I know that the Lord has turned to us sometimes. When we've been in a situation, we've been in that storm, he is right there to rebuke the winds and rebuke, the situation. But he also looks to us to understand that we have that same power. We have that same authority. We have that same assurance. Now, I was looking at this, that word rebuked. It was interesting how it says he rebuked the winds. He rebuked the sea, and it was calm. And they looked upon him and they thought, who has such authority? What kind of authority is this? But the Lord himself was saying, you have the same authority. But he rebuked the winds. Now, when I looked at that, it made me think, again, going back to seasoned fishermen, did they not see the storm coming? Did they not look upon the situation and say, okay, there's a storm coming, let's get ready for it, let's do this, let's do that? Did they look upon the situation with the eyes that they should have looked upon it with? Or did they just simply get scared? Now, maybe there was a reason. Maybe there was something particularly about this storm that caused them to be particularly frightful. Now, it doesn't necessarily say that it stirred up and it started to happen and they could see the clouds darken. It says how a storm came upon them. Now, in the reference, when we look at the story, as I said, it uses that word rebuked. And the Lord says, he rebuked the winds, he rebuked the sea, that they were calm. But it also has a reference there that he muzzled the winds. He muzzled the sea and the waves. In other words, it's almost to say that it was like an attacking form that was coming upon them. So there will be those storms in our lives where they might just be a flat-out attack on us, whether it be as an assembly, whether it be as an individual, whether it be as a family. There might be that flat-out attack on you. Now, what we need to remember is even in those situations, especially in those situations, that the Lord is there, that we can have confidence in him, we can have authority in him, we can have power in him. And that we can look upon that situation and we can rebuke it. Peace, be still. That's the power and authority that we, as brothers and sisters, as spirit-filled people, have been given. We rebuke it. And sometimes we need to look at that storm and rebuke it. Not to put up with it. Not to say, run to the Lord and say, care us not that we perish. But to stand against that storm and say, peace, be still. If that's what's required. Now, some storms, they'll come upon us and they will be an attack. We've had those as an assembly. We've had that. We've come through it. We've seen the rainbow. We've seen the peace. We've seen the joy that's come from, those specific storms that have come against us. We've seen it time and time again. But where do those storms come from? Do they come from the Lord? Are they a test from the Lord? I don't think so. But there'll be the world coming against us, maybe as an individual, as an assembly, in a fellowship, or whatever the case may be. Whatever it is. We have a brother in Fresno who's a brother and sister in Fresno who are looking to the Lord. They're dealing with their own storm right now. Their child needs a healing. There's different people around the world that are asking for healings of the Lord, and they're dealing with their own storms. But the beautiful part is, as much as they are in that storm, they're not in it alone. They're not there alone. They're there with the Lord, and the Lord's right there. It speaks about how Satan has been referred to as the prince of the air. And, it says how he walks in this world according to the prince and power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of obedience. That spirit works in the world, but we're not part of the world. Satan has no power over us in this place, but he will try his hand and he will try what he can do. He will try all sorts of things to throw at us. But what power do we have? Just as that storm came upon the disciples and Jesus said, look upon that storm and say, peace, be still. Because that's the power you have. The world doesn't have that power. The world doesn't have that comfort, that peace. It's not able to deal with the storms the same way we can. But it doesn't mean that the storms won't be there. It doesn't mean that, the storms won't happen. And that, it will always be like the time in the Garden of Eden where there was just a mist that came up from the ground and no rain ever came. That's not the way it's going to be. We have to go into the storm. And we have to know that the Lord is going to be there with us all the way through. There's, I love these analogies. I don't think I've ever brought these analogies up in the Word in Vancouver before. I might have brought them up somewhere else. But the buffalo, use the analogy of the buffalo. The buffalo is the only animal that will actually run into a storm. They won't run away from it. They won't hide from it. They'll actually run straight into it. Now, the purpose of that is that it's basically to minimize the amount of pain that they suffer. The buffalo will go in and they'll go straight into the storm, and they'll stand their ground and they'll wait for the storm to pass, because they know running away from it isn't going to help. So they basically go straight into the center of the storm, and they gear down in the snow, and they'll use their massive heads to sway snow from side to side, and they'll work through the storm to get to the other side, because they know that there's going to be less time to deal with the storm rather than trying to run away from it. So they run through the storm, into the storm, and on the other side. And it minimizes, the amount of how much they have to deal with that storm. And then I liken that unto us, where sometimes we have to go into that storm, and, it's a bit painful sometimes, and sometimes it's not fun. But when we get to the other side, how much better is it? When we've gotten through that storm, we've pushed through the strength of the Lord, and maybe had that temporary bad experience, that short-term pain, I guess, for long-term gain, if you want to put it that way. But they'll actually see the storm coming, the buffalo. So it's not like it catches them off guard. They see the storm coming, and they start running towards it. They don't run away from it. They don't hide from it. They run towards it. They see it coming. And, the instinct in them is to not back away. And as brothers and sisters in the Lord, we need to not back away from what's coming against us, whatever storm that would be. We can't allow, ourselves to hide from it and pretend it doesn't exist, or try and hide from it and hope it goes away. We need to look upon the situation as it is. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 40. Another likening to an animal that's... the buffalo is the only animal that walks upon the earth that runs into the storm, but there's the eagle. The eagle will actually fly straight into the storm. We look in verse 40 and verse 31, Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 31. And this is a reflection towards us. This is a reflection to who we are as brothers and sisters, as a fellowship in the Lord. Where does our strength come from? What is the likening of our strength in this world for? But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Those who wait for the Lord, who expect, look for him, hope in him, we gain strength and we renew our power in him. We will lift up our wings. We'll rise up to God like eagles, rising toward the sun. Because that's what happens when the eagle flies into the storm. What it's doing is it's not about so much getting through it. There's a different analogy here. The eagle actually uses his wingspan and the turbulence from the storm to lift him up. And it lifts him up to such a higher state of more than he could fly himself, like, whatever it is, he or she. The eagle happens to go, okay? So the eagle's flying into the storm. The turbulence of the wind is lifting the wings of the eagle up, spreads out their wings, lifts the eagle up, and what does it do? It lifts the eagle above the storm. It pushes the eagle in its flight pattern above the storm. So what's happening there is it becomes above the storm, and it's looking down at the storm now. But the strength of the eagle in itself doesn't have the strength to fly that high. So it uses the turbulence of the wind coming from that storm to actually push it up, okay? So, and the eagles have a certain lung capacity that allows them to breathe air at a higher altitude. And it's one of the few animals that's able to do that. So again, here we are being likened unto this eagle. We're going into the storm. The actual storm itself is lifting us up above. The Lord's lifting us above the storm. So then we're looking down at the storm, and we're going over the storm. It's still going on below us. It's not stopping. It's still there, but we're above it. And we're breathing air that, we as spiritual people are breathing the spiritual breath of the Lord. So we're able to be brought so close to the Lord that we're able to look down on storms. We're able to see below and not have those storms affect us, because now we're flying over it. We're not in it any longer. We're flying over it. It's not affecting us anymore. The Lord has literally lifted us up like eagles to the point where we're now flying over the storm. We have the strength to gear into the storm if need be, like the buffalo, but we also have the ability to raise ourselves above the storm if need be. So while other birds run from the weather, the eagle actively engages these stronger winds, and instead of seeking shelter, uses the turbulence to push itself higher. The storm allows the eagle to enter a space it cannot normally reach in good weather. As a reward for its active boldness, the eagle is given a broader view of its surroundings. And once above the storm, the eagle is clear of the rough winds, and flight becomes smoother with less effort. And how much better is it that even when we're in that storm, we get down on our knees, we call on the Lord, and the Lord gives us that strength to go through, to be lifted above. Where does that strength come from? It doesn't come from ourselves. Where does that authority come from? It doesn't come from ourselves. It doesn't come from what we put into the situation. It comes from the Lord. It comes from, asking the Lord to lift us up, to raise us up, to give us that strength. Because we can't do these things within ourselves. But with the Lord, we can do anything. Let's see. Let's go to, how much time we got? Oh, we got a few minutes. Let's go to Psalm 107. Psalm 107, verse 23. So I guess I ask us today, are we those seasoned fishermen that look upon the situation and think, well, I've never dealt with this before. What am I going to do here? And quite frankly, there are those situations where we do look at the storm and we think, how are we going to deal with this? But then we remember, well, we're not. The Lord's going to deal with this. We just have to go into it. We just need to gear down. The disciples said to themselves, and many times people would say unto Jesus, who gave you this authority? Where is this authority? Where does it come from? How is it you have it? Explain it to us. I looked up authority in the dictionary. It talks about the ability, privilege, force, capacity, competency, freedom, mastery, superhuman, delegated influence, jurisdiction, liberty, power, right, strength. These are all things that have been given to us freely of the Lord. But we need to remember what we've been given. And when someone says unto us, who gave you this authority? Where is it that you received this authority from? The disciples, they looked at Jesus and said, what kind of man is this, that he has the authority over the winds and the sea? We need to remember that the same benefit has been given unto us as brothers and sisters in the Lord. We've been given the same authority. That nothing will stand in our way. That we don't have to be afraid of the storm. We can gear into it. Or we can rebuke it if need be. Or we can fly over it. But whatever capacity that authority gives you, it comes from the Lord. And it comes from that promise that he established with us. That at the end of that storm will be a joy and a peace and a comfort and assurance that he is there. In Psalm 107, verse 23, not sure if I mentioned that. They that go down to the sea in ships, that do business in great waters. Well, we are those people. We are those fishermen. We are those ones who are out in the sea in the ships. We do business in great waters. We do business within this world. We see what goes on in this world. We see the storms that happen in this world. We see everything that's going on. There's wars going on. There's political situations. There's hardship. There's pestilences and diseases and hunger and all sorts of suffering. And here we are in the midst of it all, this massive storm that surrounds us. And the Lord is showing us what we need to do. The Lord is showing us what power and authority that we need to command in our lives. He's showing us, what power we have and authority we have to convince and to do the work of the Lord that we've been given to do. That we not be held back. That we not be hidden. That this what we know to be true not be hidden. That we would see the storms coming. We would see when these situations are occurring. And we don't run away. We don't flee to the Lord and say, "Carest not that we perish." We rebuke the winds if need be. Verse 24. These see the works of the Lord and the wonders and his wonders in the deep. How many of us have been through these storms? Think about a situation that you've been in, that you had to overcome. How did you overcome it? Did you run away? Did you hide from it? Did you run into it and face it head on? Did you allow the Lord to lift you up above it? How did you see yourself through it? But whatever way that was, whatever it was that happened, it was going to be by faith. It was going to be by power and authority of the Spirit. That's what brought you to the end of it. And how many of us have seen that great rainbow, that promise of the Lord at the end of it, and knew that the Lord was there the whole way through? They mount up to the heaven. They go down again to the depths. Their soul is melted because of trouble. So, sometimes we're raised up. Sometimes we're brought down into the world. Sometimes we find ourselves, maybe we find ourselves sinking. Maybe we find ourselves that storm is just a bit too much. Maybe we need to be lifted up. We need to be mounted up to heaven. And that's where our safety is. That's where our peace is being with the Lord, being in the presence of the Lord, being where the Lord is. As the disciples were on the ship, how many times do we mention they just should have gone to where the Lord was and sat with him? It wouldn't have mattered what was going on in the storm. The storm would have had no effect on them whatsoever. Brother Thornley was sharing a blessing with me earlier about Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. And as soon as he started talking, I thought, how much of a safer place could someone be than physically sitting at the feet of Jesus? There could be no safer place. It wouldn't matter what storms were going on outside. It wouldn't matter what was happening in Mary's life at that time, or concerns or stresses or upheavals that were happening. If she was just sitting at Jesus' feet, it wouldn't matter. Nothing else would matter. And if we find ourselves, having to go into that storm, in verse 25, it said, I think we might have skipped that actually, for he commandeth and raiseth a stormy wind, which lifteth up the waves thereof. He commandeth. He controls. He actions. He brings authority in our lives. He brings power in our lives. He mounts us up to be with him, to be directly in his presence. Verse 27, they reel to and fro and stagger like a drunken man and are at their wits' end. And they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, and he bringeth them out of their distress. We might find ourselves, running around, as the disciples were on the boat, at their wits' end, trying to figure out how to deal with the situation. And what did they need to do? Well, first off, they needed to accept what power and authority they had. But you can give them the benefit of the doubt they didn't have the Holy Spirit. We do. So let's not look at those storms that come upon us and think, we haven't been there before. We have. There's many storms that we've been through. We are seasoned fishermen. We are ones who've seen storms come and we've seen storms go. And we will see storms again. But the Lord will see us through in whatever capacity that may need to be. There's nothing that will stop us from getting through that storm as long as we know the power of the Lord is on our side. The power of the Lord is with us and goes before us. He's given us that strength. He's given us that power for a reason. Take hold of it. And whatever that storm is, it could be something individual. It could be something that, just something within yourself that you're trying to deal with that maybe no one else is. Or it's a situation that, only you are going through. But then you might find that, as you look to the Lord, you might remember, like, hang on a second. Brother so-and-so went through that same situation. Sister so-and-so went through that same situation. They saw the victory of the Lord. Why can't I see that? And then you remember that that same authority that was given to your brother and sister has been given to you. And these storms will be nothing in comparison, because the stronger you get, the more persevering you get, the more you allow yourself to just go into that storm and be lifted up above it, looking down at those things. They're nothing. They're no concern when you're above those things. When you're within it, it can be a bit painful, but once you're through it, you're stronger. And that's the benefit, and that's the beauty of the storms. Whether it be the storms that we see in life, or whether the storms we see around this world that come upon us, we need to remember and be joyful and be comforted that regardless of the storms that are happening, the Lord is with us. The Lord is right there next to us. The Lord is pulling us through. And, it's such a blessing to know that the Lord is there. It's such a blessing to know that the Lord is victorious in our lives. And I just really wanted to stress that, to really bring forth those analogies, that blessing, and I hope they were a blessing to everyone else. That's pretty much what I wanted to say, so we'll leave things there, and we'll ask the musicians to come forth, and we'll come